I never thought installing security cameras around my pool would become the secret weapon to take down the most tyrannical HOA president in my neighborhood. But when Beverly Hartwell, a 58-year-old woman who called herself the guardian of property values, decided to climb a ladder to investigate my family swimming, she hadn't counted on one thing. Gravity doesn't care about your HOA power trip. And that's just where this story begins. Because what I found in that 47-minute footage wasn't just some nosy old lady falling off a ladder. It was evidence of a scandal bigger than this whole neighborhood could imagine. Comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I'm curious if anyone else has had to deal with an HOA this crazy before. Trust me, you're gonna want to stick around for this one. 5 years. That's how long I saved every penny after my divorce to buy a house with a pool for my kids, Tyler and Madison. When I first laid eyes on Willowbrook Estates, it looked like the American dream, perfectly manicured into reality. Every house sat pristinely on quarter-acre lots, with lawns so evenly cut they looked like green carpets rolled out by some obsessive deity. The realtor kept mentioning how well-managed the neighborhood was, how the homeowners association maintained exceptional standards. What she didn't mention was that those standards were enforced by someone who made prison wardens look lenient. Beverly Hartwell appeared at my front door exactly 24 hours after moving day, armed with a clipboard thick enough to stop bullets and a measuring tape that she wielded like a weapon. Her greeting smile could have frozen hell over, and her voice carried that sickly sweet tone that immediately put me on edge. "Welcome to paradise, dear. Just follow our 47 community guidelines and we'll get along perfectly." 47 rules. Not 20, not 30. 47 specific ways I could, apparently, screw up living in my own house. What started as polite curiosity quickly turned sinister as Beverly began her orientation tour of my property. She measured my fence height with military precision, photographed my front door color from multiple angles, and actually counted the number of trees in my front yard with disturbing intensity. When we reached the backyard, her demeanor shifted completely. She stood at the edge of my pool like she was surveying a crime scene, taking notes with the fervor of someone documenting evidence. "Your pool is quite prominent," she said, her pen clicking against the clipboard in a rhythm that sounded like a ticking bomb. "We'll need to discuss visibility guidelines very soon." The way she said, "we'll need to," made it clear this wasn't a friendly suggestion. This was the opening move in what would become a war I never signed up for. The other neighbors seemed friendly enough during those first few days, but I noticed how conversations died whenever Beverly's name came up. Patrick Wilson, who lived 2 houses down, pulled me aside during my second week. His voice dropped to a whisper as he glanced around nervously. "Just keep your head down, man. Trust me on this one." When I pressed him for details, he just shook his head and walked away quickly, like he'd already said too much. By the end of that first week, I started noticing Beverly's daily routine. Every evening around 6, she'd take her constitutional walk around the neighborhood. Funny thing though, her route always seemed to pass by my house at least 3 times, and every time she passed, she'd pause just long enough to peer over my fence at the pool area. When I waved from my kitchen window one evening, instead of waving back, she quickly looked away and hurried past like I'd caught her doing something wrong. That night, as I tucked Tyler and Madison into bed, Tyler asked me something that made my blood run cold. "Daddy, why does that lady always look at our pool?" Madison says she's scary. I assured him everything was fine, but lying in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Beverly Hartwell wasn't just particular about neighborhood aesthetics. She was obsessed with my pool specifically, and I had no idea why. What I did know was that this was just the beginning of something much bigger and more twisted than a simple neighbor dispute. The first email from the HOA arrived exactly 7 days after my encounter with Beverly. The subject line read, "Pool Compliance Review Request, Urgent Request Required," and attached were 15 pages of technical documentation requirements that my pool contractor had never heard of. When I called the HOA office for clarification, Beverly's voice on the other end carried a smugness that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Mr. Thompson, I'm so glad you called. We need to ensure your pool meets our community's aesthetic compliance standards. After all, recreational facilities must maintain visual harmony with the overall neighborhood design." Visual harmony? My pool was a standard rectangular design, identical to half the pools in the subdivision. But according to Beverly, mine needed special scrutiny because of its prominent placement and potential impact on community property values. The documentation Beverly demanded was absurd. pool certification from a licensed engineer, chemical composition reports updated monthly, noise level assessments during various weather conditions, and something called a Neighborhood Integration Compliance Certificate that didn't seem to exist anywhere in the real world. I spent hours researching the HOA bylaws, finding only a vaguely worded clause about recreational facilities maintaining community visual harmony subject to board interpretation. That last part, subject to board interpretation, gave Beverly essentially unlimited power to decide what was acceptable, and Beverly clearly had very specific ideas about what wasn't acceptable in my case. Within days of that phone call, she began what I can only describe as surveillance. Every afternoon, like clockwork, Beverly would appear on my street with a professional-grade camera, photographing my pool from every conceivable angle. She'd set up at different positions along the sidewalk, sometimes even standing on her tiptoes to get shots over the fence. The woman was documenting my pool like she was preparing for a court case. Things escalated when Beverly scheduled an informal property walkthrough without asking my permission. I was working from home when she appeared at my front door with two people she introduced as community compliance consultants. The man and woman with her looked more like real estate agents than any kind of building inspectors, but Beverly insisted they needed to assess potential issues before they became violations. When I politely declined their request to access my backyard, Beverly's mask of politeness slipped completely. Her voice turned ice cold as she informed me, "I'm trying to help you avoid formal citations, Mr. Thompson, but if you prefer to handle this through official channels, that can certainly be arranged." The threat hung in the air between us like smoke from a gun barrel. I closed the door firmly and watched through the window as the three of them stood on my driveway for another 10 minutes, pointing at my house and taking more photographs. That's when I knew this had moved far beyond neighborly concern into something much more sinister. The real line was crossed when Beverly started involving my children. Tyler and Madison were playing in our front yard when Beverly approached them with questions that no adult should be asking someone else's kids. "Does your daddy let you swim whenever you want? That must be very noisy for all the neighbors." When Tyler excitedly told her about our pool parties and how much fun they had swimming every day, Beverly's response chilled me to the bone. "Well, that's certainly inconsiderate of your father. Good neighbors think about how their actions affect others." My 8 and 10-year-old children came inside, confused and worried, asking if they were being bad kids for enjoying their pool. That evening, I marched over to Beverly's house for a direct confrontation. Standing on her perfect front porch, surrounded by flowers arranged with military precision, I made myself clear. "Mrs. Hartwell, I need you to stop involving my children in whatever issue you have with my pool. They're kids, and this is between adults." Beverly opened her screen door just wide enough to reveal her satisfied smile. "I'm simply being neighborly, Mr. Thompson. Children should understand community responsibility, don't you think? After all, some properties in this area are meant to be single-family forever. Times change and neighborhood needs evolve." That last comment stayed with me long after I walked away. What did she mean about properties not being meant for single families forever? Patrick Wilson's warning echoed in my head as I researched security camera systems that night. By morning, I had made a decision that would change everything. If Beverly wanted to play games, I needed evidence of exactly what game she was playing. The next day, I had 4 high-definition security cameras installed around my property, with special attention to pool area coverage. I told the installation technician it was for general home security, but deep down, I knew I was setting a trap. Whatever Beverly was really up to, I was going to catch her in the act. Little did I know that within 24 hours of those cameras going live, I'd have footage that would expose a conspiracy larger than anything I could have imagined. And Beverly Hartwell was about to hand me the evidence to destroy her completely. The first official citation arrived via certified mail exactly 48 hours after my security cameras went live. Opening that envelope felt like opening a declaration of war. "Pool equipment visible from street view, $150 fine," read the violation notice, complete with a photograph of my completely enclosed pool pump area. I walked outside to investigate, checking every possible angle from the street. My pool equipment was entirely hidden behind a 6-foot privacy fence, exactly as it had been when the previous homeowner installed it 3 years earlier. When I called to dispute the citation, Beverly's explanation defied logic. "Mr. Thompson, the violation includes potential visibility during certain wind conditions when fence panels might shift. We must consider all scenarios that could impact community aesthetic standards." Potential visibility? During wind conditions? I was being fined for something that might possibly, maybe happen if the wind blew hard enough to move solid wooden fence panels. Her tone carried that special kind of condescension that made my teeth ache, like she was explaining basic mathematics to a particularly slow child. The second citation arrived the following Tuesday, before I'd even paid the first one: excessive recreational water noise during community quiet hours, $200 fine. According to the citation, community quiet hours were defined as 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., but my pool filter system ran continuously, like every other pool filter in America. When I pointed this out to Beverly, she had an answer ready that proved she'd given this considerable thought. Your particular filtration system creates distinctive disturbance patterns that are more disruptive than standard pool equipment. We've received multiple neighbor complaints about the noise level, particularly during evening hours when people are trying to enjoy their patios. I knew this was complete fabrication because I'd spoken to every immediate neighbor about general property concerns when I first moved in. Mrs. Rodriguez next door had actually complimented how quiet my backyard was compared to her previous neighborhood. Mr. Chen across the street said he couldn't even hear my pool from his bedroom window. But Beverly had a ready explanation for their lack of complaints. Not all community members feel comfortable approaching newer residents directly about concerns, Mr. Thompson. Many prefer to work through proper administrative channels to avoid confrontation. The way she said newer residents made it sound like some kind of diagnosed condition. The third citation pushed me past frustration into genuine fury. Unauthorized modification to approved pool design, $350 fine. The violation claimed I'd added a non-regulation poolside seating area that wasn't part of the original approved design. The photographic evidence attached showed my 2 pool chairs, 2 standard, unremarkable pool chairs that any rational person would expect to find next to a swimming pool. According to Beverly's citation, these chairs constituted substantial structural additions to the recreational area that alter the approved aesthetic profile and potentially violate setback requirements. I spent an entire evening measuring distances from my chairs to property lines, confirming they were well within all reasonable boundaries. When I called to schedule a meeting to discuss this absurdity, Beverly informed me with obvious satisfaction that formal violation reviews are scheduled according to board availability, and our next opening is November 15th. 6 months. 6 months to resolve a dispute about 2 pool chairs, during which time daily accumulating fines would continue to pile up like interest on a loan shark's debt. The system wasn't just biased, it was rigged to make fighting back financially impossible. What made everything worse was how Beverly's harassment campaign started affecting my children's daily lives. Tyler had always been the kind of kid who jumped out of bed excited about each new day, but he began asking permission for things he'd never questioned before. "Daddy, is it okay if I swim today?" The lady said it might be too loud. Madison, who'd been thriving in her new school and making friends easily, started having nightmares about losing our house because of something she'd done wrong. The pool that was supposed to be the centerpiece of their childhood happiness had become a source of anxiety and guilt. I found myself constantly reassuring them that they weren't doing anything wrong, that they had every right to enjoy their own backyard. But 8- and 10-year-olds shouldn't need those kinds of reassurances about fundamental aspects of their home life. The breaking point came when Beverly intercepted Tyler on his walk to the school bus stop. According to his tearful account that evening, she'd approached him with the kind of questions that would make any parent's blood boil. "Does your daddy swim at night? That seems very inconsiderate to our neighbors who are trying to sleep. Do you think your family should be more thoughtful about how loudly you play in your pool?" She'd spoken to him with the same tone of disappointed authority that teachers use with misbehaving students, making my 8-year-old feel personally responsible for our family's bad behavior. That evening, I called Beverly directly, my hands literally shaking with rage as I dialed her number. When she answered with her usual syrupy greeting, I dispensed with any pretense of neighborly politeness. "Mrs. Hartwell, if you approach my children again with questions about our family's personal activities, we're going to have a much bigger problem than pool violations." Her response was delivered with the kind of chilling calm that made me realize I was dealing with someone far more calculating than a simple busybody neighbor. "Mr. Thompson, I'm simply helping your children understand the importance of community responsibility and considerate living. Perhaps you'd be happier in a less regulated environment where individual desires take precedence over community harmony." The way she emphasized regulated environment sounded almost like a threat, as if she had the power to make our lives even more miserable than they already were. After hanging up, I stood in my kitchen, staring out at the pool that had started this whole mess, wondering how something that brought my children so much joy had become the focal point of such an ugly conflict. The psychological warfare was taking its toll on all of us in ways I hadn't anticipated. I found myself checking the security cameras obsessively, refreshing the app on my phone dozens of times each day, looking for any sign of Beverly's next move. Sleep became elusive as I lay awake, running through possible scenarios, planning responses to violations she hadn't even issued yet. My work performance suffered as I spent company time researching HOA regulations and precedent cases, trying to find some leverage in what felt like an increasingly one-sided battle. The kids picked up on our household tension despite my efforts to shield them from it, becoming more clingy and requiring constant reassurance that our family was safe and secure. Tyler started asking if we might have to move again, while Madison drew pictures of houses without swimming pools, as if she was already preparing herself for the loss. This wasn't how I'd imagined our new life in our dream home would unfold. I'd saved for 5 years to give my children this stability and happiness, only to watch it slowly poisoned by one person's inexplicable vendetta against our family's right to exist peacefully in our own space. But reviewing that first week of security footage would reveal something that changed the entire dynamic of our conflict. Beverly hadn't just been observing my property from the safety of public sidewalks and her own windows. She'd been trespassing on my property in the middle of the night, conducting what could only be described as surveillance operations while my family slept. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and Beverly Hartwell had no idea that her own arrogance and sense of entitlement had just handed me the evidence I needed to turn this war around completely. What I discovered in those dark hours of recorded footage would prove that her harassment campaign was about far more than pool violations or neighborhood aesthetics. Beverly was operating under a much larger agenda, and she had just made the critical mistake of underestimating exactly how far one determined father would go to protect his family's home and happiness. Checking security camera footage became part of my morning routine, like drinking coffee or reading the newspaper used to be in simpler times. On Thursday morning, scrolling through Tuesday night's recordings while Tyler and Madison got ready for school, I saw something that made me nearly drop my laptop on the kitchen floor. There, clear as day in high-definition infrared video, was Beverly Hartwell creeping around my backyard at 11:45 p.m. like some kind of suburban cat burglar. She wasn't just casually looking around. She was methodically measuring my pool with a professional tape measure, photographing every angle with a camera that had clearly cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment, and taking detailed notes in a small notebook by flashlight. This wasn't the behavior of a concerned neighbor or even an overzealous HOA president. This was professional-level surveillance being conducted under cover of darkness by someone who obviously had extensive experience with this kind of covert operation. As I scrolled back through previous night's footage, a disturbing pattern emerged that made my stomach churn with violation and anger. Beverly had trespassed on my property 4 separate times over the past 2 weeks, always between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., always when my house was completely dark and my family was asleep. Each visit was more thorough than the last, suggesting she was building some kind of comprehensive case against my property using illegally obtained evidence. In the earliest recording, she'd simply walked around the pool perimeter, but by the most recent visit, she was conducting what could only be described as a professional property survey. She had measured not just the pool dimensions, but the distances between the pool and various property lines, the height of surrounding fences, the placement of my outdoor furniture, and even the positioning of potted plants that Tyler and Madison had helped me arrange when we first moved in. Every measurement was carefully documented, every angle photographed with scientific precision. The most disturbing footage showed Beverly's complete disregard for basic human decency and legal boundaries. In one particularly invasive clip, she knelt by the pool's edge with what appeared to be small glass vials, collecting water samples like some kind of environmental investigator building a case for contamination. Her movements were careful and practiced, suggesting this wasn't her first time conducting this type of covert operation. But the most shocking moment came when she attempted to install some kind of device near the pool filter system. The object was small and black, roughly the size of a matchbox, with what looked like a short antenna protruding from one end. Whatever it was, Beverly was clearly trying to attach it to the filter housing in a location where it would be hidden from casual observation. When her efforts to secure the device failed and it slipped from her hands into the surrounding landscaping, Beverly spent nearly 20 minutes on her hands and knees, searching through mulch and decorative plants with her flashlight, clearly desperate to retrieve whatever surveillance equipment she'd just lost in my yard. Armed with this overwhelming evidence of criminal trespassing, I dressed carefully in my most professional outfit and headed straight to the police station. Officer Johnson, a friendly middle-aged man who looked like he'd seen every possible variation of neighborhood disputes, listened patiently as I explained the situation and showed him the clearest footage on my phone. His response was sympathetic but revealed the limitations of law enforcement when dealing with civil matters disguised as criminal ones. "Mr. Thompson, I can clearly see this constitutes trespassing, and you have excellent evidence to support that charge. However, HOA disputes typically fall under civil jurisdiction unless there's significant property damage or direct threats involving bodily harm. We can absolutely document this report and include it in our files, but for prosecution of first offense trespassing charges, you'll need to pursue the matter through civil court or wait for escalation to more serious criminal behavior." He did suggest that I send Beverly a certified letter formally notifying her that she was no longer welcome on my property and that any future trespassing would result in immediate criminal charges. While this wasn't the immediate justice I'd hoped for, at least I now had official documentation of Beverly's illegal activities. When I confronted Beverly about the trespassing evidence, her reaction revealed just how deeply her sense of entitlement and abuse of power had corrupted her understanding of basic legal and ethical boundaries. I knocked on her door at 8 a.m. sharp, armed with printed screenshots from the security footage that clearly showed her face and activities. She answered wearing an expensive silk robe, her hair perfectly styled, as if she'd been awake for hours preparing for this exact encounter. "Mrs. Hartwell, I have clear video evidence of you trespassing on my property multiple times over the past 2 weeks. This illegal behavior stops immediately." Instead of the denial, apology, or even embarrassment that any normal person would show when caught red-handed breaking the law, Beverly stepped outside and carefully closed her door behind her, as if she was preparing for a business negotiation rather than answering for criminal activity. "Mr. Thompson, as president of this homeowners association, I have inspection authority over properties that may pose liability issues to our community. Pools represent potential safety concerns that require periodic assessment for insurance and legal compliance purposes." Her twisted logic was absolutely breathtaking. She genuinely believed that her elected position in a volunteer organization gave her the right to break into my backyard whenever she pleased, conducting unauthorized inspections of my private property while my family slept. When I informed her about my police report and explicitly warned her about future criminal charges if she set foot on my property again, Beverly simply smiled that cold, calculating smile that I was beginning to recognize as her default expression when challenged. "I think you'll find that community safety concerns and legitimate administrative oversight supersede individual property rights in certain circumstances, Mr. Thompson. HOA bylaws grant significant inspection authority when potential violations threaten community welfare." She spoke with the confidence of someone who'd been getting away with this behavior for so long that she'd convinced herself it was not only legal, but righteous. As I walked back to my house, I realized that Beverly's sense of power and entitlement ran so deep that she might actually escalate her harassment rather than back down from a direct challenge. I was right to be concerned, because the fourth citation arrived that same afternoon, and this one was clearly designed as punishment for daring to stand up to her authority. "Unauthorized pool dimensions exceed community standards, $500 fine," read the new violation, and this citation was Beverly's masterpiece of manipulative bureaucracy. According to her documentation, recent measurements had revealed that my pool exceeded maximum allowable dimensions per updated community guidelines. I immediately pulled out my original blueprints and building permits, comparing them carefully to the HOA architectural approval documentation I'd inherited from the previous owner. Everything matched perfectly. My pool was exactly the size that had been approved in the original construction plans, but something was seriously wrong with Beverly's citation, and a little investigation revealed the depth of her corrupt manipulation of HOA regulations. She was referencing pool-listed community standards adopted on March 15th of this year, a date that fell 3 months after I had purchased the house and nearly 2 years after pool construction had been completed. Someone had retroactively changed the rules to create violations where none had existed before, and I had a very strong suspicion about who was responsible for these convenient regulatory modifications. Further research into HOA records revealed a pattern of systematic rule changes that painted Beverly's harassment campaign in an even more sinister light. The maximum allowable pool size had been quietly reduced from 600 square feet to 400 square feet, with the change backdated in official documentation to make it appear as if the restriction had always existed. Other regulations had been similarly modified. Allowable fence heights reduced, acceptable garden sizes decreased, noise restrictions tightened, architectural guidelines made more restrictive. Every change seemed designed to create violations for existing homeowners who had built their improvements under previous rules that Beverly had now retroactively invalidated. This wasn't just selective enforcement of existing regulations. This was systematic manipulation of the rulebook itself to create justification for harassment and fines against specific targeted households. Beverly wasn't just abusing her power as HOA president, she was actively rewriting the laws to make her abuse appear legitimate. That evening, Patrick Wilson approached me as I was checking my mailbox, looking around nervously, as if he was worried about being overheard or observed. His usual friendly demeanor was replaced by genuine anxiety that made me realize this conversation was going to reveal something significant about Beverly's long-term operations. "David, I need to tell you something important about Beverly that I should have mentioned when you first moved in. She's done this exact same thing to 3 other families before you arrived in the neighborhood. The Hendersons on Maple Street, the Martinez family in the corner house, the Johnsons who used to live where the Patels live now, all of them were forced out through constant violations, escalating fines, and legal pressure that made their lives absolutely miserable." He paused, glancing toward Beverly's house as if she might be watching us from her windows. "What really worries me is the pattern I've noticed. She seems to target houses with the highest property values first. Your house, my house, the Richardsons on the corner lot, we all have the nicest properties in terms of size and recent improvements, and we all seem to end up in her crosshairs eventually." As Patrick walked away, his revelation echoed in my mind with disturbing implications. Beverly wasn't randomly harassing homeowners out of general power hunger or personal satisfaction. She was systematically targeting specific families and driving them out of the neighborhood through coordinated campaigns of bureaucratic terrorism. But why would she want to force successful, property value-enhancing families out of Willowbrook Estates? What possible benefit could she gain from driving away the very residents who should be most valued by any legitimate homeowners association? The answer to that question was about to reveal itself in the most spectacular and incriminating way possible, captured in perfect high definition by the very security cameras I had installed to document her trespassing. Beverly Hartwell was about to hand me evidence of a conspiracy that would shock the entire neighborhood and provide the ammunition needed to destroy her corrupt empire forever. The morning of June 8th started like any other, with my usual routine of checking overnight security footage while drinking my first cup of coffee. But what I saw that morning made me spit coffee across my kitchen table. Beginning at 6:07 a.m., Beverly Hartwell was captured conducting the most ambitious surveillance operation I could have imagined. She'd arrived with a telescoping ladder, professional photography equipment, and what appeared to be surveying tools, all while dressed in black from head to toe like some kind of suburban ninja. The woman was 60 years old and attempting a covert military-style operation in broad daylight. Watching this unfold in real time felt like witnessing a nature documentary about the world's most incompetent spy. The comedy began immediately, as Beverly struggled with equipment far beyond her physical capabilities. The telescoping ladder, fully extended, was clearly too heavy for her to manage alone. She'd positioned it against the fence line, separating my property from the community walking path, apparently attempting to get an aerial view of my pool area. The footage showed her making multiple attempts to climb while juggling a camera bag and notebook, sweat visible on her face even in the dawn light. When my automatic sprinkler system activated at 6:15, Beverly nearly abandoned her mission entirely, jumping back from the spray like she was being attacked. But her determination was absolute. This woman was going to get her spy photos no matter what obstacles stood in her way. The latter incident itself was both inevitable and spectacular. Beverly had made it roughly halfway up when physics reminded her why 60-year-old women shouldn't attempt espionage missions. The ladder's base slipped on the dew-wet grass, sending Beverly tumbling backward in what appeared to be slow motion. She crashed directly into Patrick Wilson's prized rose garden, landing in a tangle of thorns and expensive flowering bushes. For the next 20 minutes, the security footage captured Beverly groaning and cursing while struggling to extract herself from the roses, her black spy outfit now decorated with tears and probably more than a few scratches. Watching her attempt to maintain dignity while trapped in landscaping would have been hilarious if not for what happened next. During her graceless extraction from the rose bushes, Beverly dropped something significant. A messenger bag she'd been carrying spilled its contents across Patrick's yard, and what scattered across the grass changed everything I thought I knew about this situation. I could clearly see property documents, photographs, and what appeared to be architectural drawings of multiple houses in our neighborhood. But the item that really caught my attention was a manila folder, marked in large letters, Property Acquisition Strategy, Willowbrook Phase 2. This wasn't about pool violations or neighborhood aesthetics. Beverly had been planning something much larger, and she just accidentally provided me with the evidence to prove it. I watched the footage 3 more times, noting exactly where each document had fallen and marking the timestamp for future reference. After Beverly limped away from the scene, clutching her messenger bag and what she'd managed to retrieve, I waited exactly 1 hour before taking a casual walk past Patrick's house. Most of the scattered papers had been collected, but Beverly's frantic search had missed several items half hidden under the rose bushes. Among the documents I carefully photographed before replacing them was a partial contract with Pinnacle Development Corporation, detailing consultation fees for neighborhood transition facilitation. The dollar amount visible on the contract fragment was $2.3 million. Beverly wasn't just harassing homeowners out of spite or power hunger. She was being paid enormous sums to drive us away, clearing the path for some kind of massive development project. This explained everything. The systematic targeting of high-value properties, the increasingly absurd violations, the retrofitted rule changes. Beverly Hartwell was conducting a calculated campaign to force property sales, and I just stumbled onto evidence of the entire conspiracy. That evening, I sat in my living room reviewing every piece of evidence I'd gathered. Security footage of systematic trespassing, documentation of fabricated violations, photos of development contracts and property acquisition strategies. What had started as a petty dispute over pool regulations had revealed itself as an elaborate real estate fraud scheme involving millions of dollars and potentially dozens of families. Beverly's decades of legal experience had taught her exactly how to manipulate HOA regulations to serve her purpose, but her arrogance had made her sloppy. She'd never imagined that one homeowner would fight back with the same systematic approach she used to destroy families. The hunter had become the hunted, and Beverly Hartwell was about to learn that her victims weren't as helpless as she believed. But first, I needed allies. And fortunately, Beverly's own actions had created plenty of potential allies who were just waiting for someone brave enough to stand up to her. The document collection from Beverly's dramatic fall had given me pieces of a much larger puzzle, but I needed the complete picture before taking action. That weekend, I spent hours digitally enhancing photos of the scattered documents, cross-referencing property records, and researching Pinnacle Development Corporation. What I discovered was bigger than I'd imagined. Pinnacle wasn't just some local development company. They specialized in what they called neighborhood transformation projects, essentially buying up entire residential blocks to convert them into high-density luxury condominiums. Their website showed similar projects across suburban America, always featuring before and after photos that made my blood boil. The before pictures showed neighborhoods that looked exactly like Willowbrook Estates, single-family homes with generous yards and mature trees. The after pictures showed sterile concrete towers with names like Willowbrook Luxury Living and Estate View Condominiums. The financial trail was even more damning than I'd expected. Corporate filings revealed that Pinnacle had acquired development rights for future high-density residential construction in our area back in 2019, 2 years before I'd even started house hunting. The zoning variance had been approved by the City Planning Commission, where Beverly's late husband had served as a board member until his death in 2020. This wasn't a recent scheme, it was a long-term plan that had been in motion for years. Beverly's role was to systematically drive out homeowners through HOA harassment, forcing them to sell below market value to buyers who were secretly connected to Pinnacle. Once enough properties were acquired, the entire neighborhood would be demolished for luxury condos. The projected profits were staggering. $45 million from the complete development, with Beverly personally receiving over $2 million in consultation fees. Armed with this evidence, I decided to reach out to other affected homeowners. Rachel Stevens, the board member who'd always seemed uncomfortable during Beverly's power trips, agreed to meet me for coffee at a diner 20 minutes outside our neighborhood. Rachel appeared nervous and kept checking over her shoulder as if we might be followed. "Beverly, David, what you're showing me confirms everything I've suspected for years. Beverly has detailed files on everyone in the neighborhood: financial problems, permit violations, family situations. She uses that information to pressure people into compliance or silence. Rachel revealed that Beverly had been systematically blackmailing board members to ensure their cooperation. She knows about Mark's home office zoning violation, about Jennifer's bankruptcy from 8 years ago, about my husband's DUI from when we were 25. She has leverage on everyone except you, because you're new and she hasn't had time to dig up dirt yet. The community investigation revealed a pattern of systematic abuse spanning years. When I approached Patrick Wilson with my evidence, he finally opened up about his own experience. She threatened to report my home office for commercial use in a residential zone. I work from home 3 days a week as a software consultant, completely legal under current zoning laws, but she claimed to have evidence of excessive commercial traffic that could result in forced sale of my property. Other neighbors shared similar stories when promised anonymity. The Richardsons had been cited for excessive garden watering during their daughter's wedding reception. The Millers faced constant violations for their teenage son's car being parked in their own driveway. Every family Beverly targeted shared 2 characteristics. They owned high-value properties, and they had something in their lives that could be twisted into an HOA violation with creative interpretation. My preparation for confrontation became all-consuming. I compiled a comprehensive dossier with security footage, financial documents, victim testimonies, and research into Pinnacle's other projects. The evidence filled 2 thick binders, with copies stored in multiple locations in case Beverly attempted to steal or destroy the originals. I researched HOA law extensively, finding precedents for removing board members who violated their fiduciary duties. I even consulted with a lawyer who specialized in homeowner association disputes, learning exactly what evidence would be needed for potential criminal charges. Everything was falling into place for the perfect ambush, but Beverly wasn't finished with her own offensive. She had one more nuclear option in her arsenal, and she was about to deploy it with devastating effect. The final notice arrived on a Tuesday evening, delivered by a professional process server at 9:47 p.m. Emergency pool removal order, immediate compliance required, declared that my pool posed an imminent safety hazard to community welfare and must be completely removed within 48 hours. Failure to comply would result in $10,000 in daily fines, plus immediate legal action for maintaining a public nuisance. The documentation included photos of imaginary cracks in my pool structure, fake water quality reports showing dangerous chemical levels, and a completely fabricated engineering assessment declaring the pool structurally unsound and environmentally hazardous. Beverly had pulled out all the stops, creating an entire portfolio of false evidence to justify emergency action that would bypass normal appeals processes. I had exactly 48 hours to save my pool and expose Beverly's conspiracy, or lose everything I had worked 5 years to achieve. The final battle was about to begin, and I was ready to use every weapon in my arsenal to destroy Beverly Hartwell's criminal enterprise once and for all. The emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the community center. But word had spread throughout the neighborhood like wildfire. By 6:30, the parking lot was already full, and residents were still arriving on foot. 47 people packed into a room designed for maybe 20, creating an atmosphere charged with anticipation and long-suppressed anger. Beverly sat at the head table with her usual composed confidence, flanked by the other board members who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the crowd continued to grow. She'd clearly expected this to be a routine administrative meeting where she'd railroad through the pool removal authorization. Instead, she faced the largest HOA gathering in Willowbrook history, filled with neighbors who were finally ready to speak truth to power. I'd spent the day preparing my presentation with the same meticulous attention Beverly used for her harassment campaigns. Every piece of evidence was organized chronologically, every document cross-referenced, every timeline verified. But my secret weapon wasn't the evidence itself. It was the way I'd learned to present it from watching Beverly manipulate facts for years. I began with the security footage of her midnight trespassing, letting the absurdity speak for itself as residents watched their HOA president skulking around my backyard like a common criminal. Laughter rippled through the room when the latter incident played on the borrowed projector screen. Seeing Beverly tumble into the rose bushes transformed her from intimidating authority figure into just another fallible human being caught doing something ridiculous. As I presented the evidence of Beverly's systematic harassment, the mood in the room shifted from amusement to outrage. When I showed the fabricated citations and the retroactively changed pool size regulations, several residents called out their own experiences with similar treatment. The property acquisition documents and Pinnacle development contracts drew audible gasps from the crowd. People began connecting dots they'd never seen before. Why certain families had suddenly moved away, why property values had mysteriously fluctuated, why Beverly always seemed to know everyone's personal business. The revelation that their neighborhood was being systematically destroyed for developer profits hit like a hurricane of delayed realization. Beverly's defense strategy was predictable but increasingly desperate. She attempted to discredit me as a disgruntled newcomer who was misrepresenting routine administrative procedures. She claimed the development documents were personal investment research, unrelated to her HOA duties. She insisted the security footage was taken out of context and that her presence on my property was authorized by community safety protocols. But with each excuse, her composure cracked a little more. When board member Mark Roberts finally found his voice and admitted, "Beverly has been blackmailing me for 3 years about a home office permit issue," the room erupted. Other residents began shouting their own stories of Beverly's manipulation and threats. The careful facade of legitimate governance was crashing down in real time. The first major bombshell came from Patrick Wilson, who stood up with his own folder of evidence. "I have security footage showing Beverly's associates placing fake structural damage markers around multiple targeted properties, including my house and the Richardsons." His cameras had captured men in unmarked vans installing small metal devices near home foundations, then photographing them later as evidence of settling issues that could threaten property value. The revelation that Beverly's network included people actively sabotaging properties to create justification for violations sent shockwaves through the room. This wasn't just bureaucratic overreach, it was organized criminal activity designed to defraud homeowners out of their properties. Rachel Stevens delivered the coup de grace when she produced Beverly's personal laptop, forgotten during the medical assistance after her ladder fall. This contains emails with Pinnacle development dating back 4 years, including milestone payments for each successful property acquisition. There are also draft resignation letters for every board member and a pre-written press release announcing the unanimous decision to dissolve the current HOA structure and transfer management to Pinnacle's subsidiary. The laptop contained Beverly's entire digital footprint of the conspiracy. Communications with fake inspectors, financial records showing consultation payments, and detailed profiles of every homeowner, including their vulnerabilities and estimated resistance to pressure tactics. The board vote was swift and overwhelming, 6-1, with Beverly abstaining. Before storming out in defeat, they voted to immediately remove her from all positions. Rachel Stevens was appointed interim president, and her first motion was to void all violations issued over the past 3 years, pending individual review. Contact information for a lawyer specializing in HOA fraud was distributed to affected residents. Within hours, Beverly's reign of terror was officially over, and the criminal investigation into her activities was just beginning. The transformation was immediate and visible. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years were comparing stories and offering support. Children who'd been afraid to use their own pools were jumping in the water with pure joy. 6 months later, Willowbrook Estates had become the neighborhood we'd always pretended it was. Beverly's house sold for 20% below market value after she fled to avoid criminal prosecution. The new owners, a young family with twins, were welcomed with a genuine community pool party at my house. Patrick Wilson had installed a neighborhood-wide security camera network that actually protected residents instead of spying on them. The kids rode their bikes freely without fear of generating traffic violation citations. Property values rose as word spread about our victory over HOA corruption, attracting families who wanted to live somewhere that valued community over control. And my pool? It remained exactly as it was, the perfect size for my children's happiness and the neighborhood's healing. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well, especially when you have 47 minutes of security footage to prove justice was served.
Thanks for watching QA Stories. Share this video with someone who loves a good plot twist. And don't forget to subscribe.